What's happening, people? goukigod here, and in this video I want to talk about Call of Duty again and about the 2017 game. I know that in the last video I kind of talked about or theorized or hypothesized about what the new game will be this year, and we kind of talked about boots on the ground and potentially going back to a pre-modern era, potentially World War II. But there's been a lot of talk recently about that. There's apparently been some supposed leaks and some information dropped that it looks kind of legit. It doesn't look 100% legit. Drifter seems to think it looks pretty convincing. I'm not so sure. But what I wanted to talk about in this video is the Vietnam theory. Now, this became very popular at the beginning of the year because there was a leaked video that looked very, very convincing, and a lot of people thought that this was confirmation that the Vietnam game was going to happen. So I thought it might be interesting to have a look at all the information that we have about the Vietnam game and discuss the possibility of this year's game actually going to Vietnam or being set around that time. So the gameplay that you're watching is a mixture of Black Ops and World at War, which is the last two pre-modern era Call of Duty games, so I thought that that would be the most appropriate. Now, I actually used some concept art from the cancelled Sledgehammer Vietnam Call of Duty game in my last video title. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that concept art. There's only 3 images from a concept artist who worked on the game, so I'll throw those up now. And they're pretty cool, but they don't really give too much information on the game. So as you can see, there actually was some work done on a Vietnam Call of Duty game. This was done by Sledgehammer. So Vietnam as a setting is quite plausible and quite attractive in the Call of Duty universe because it's only appeared in one game so far, and that's obviously Black Ops. And in Black Ops, it was only a small component of the game. The whole game wasn't based in Vietnam. You obviously had the Viet Cong as a faction, but the whole game was split through different eras in different countries. So as a whole, the game wasn't completely set in Vietnam. So I think a lot of people feel like this is territory that could still be explored. Now, the other piece of information which I didn't really talk about in the previous video that hints at what this new game might be was a tweet that was sent out at Christmas time from Sledgehammer, which had an M1911 in it, which a lot of people took as confirmation that the new game would be set in a pre-modern era, or at least in a present-day era. Now, obviously, the M1911 has appeared in a lot of games, including Advanced Warfare, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the game is going to be set in present day or a pre-modern era, but I think it's a pretty good indication. So I think everybody can agree that this year's Call of Duty game is either going to be a present day or a pre-modern era shooter. So it's not likely that we're going to have a futuristic setting. It's most likely going to be boots on the ground. And in terms of where it's going to be located, obviously we've had a lot of talk about World War II being a setting. And although I don't think it's a bad idea for Call of Duty to go back to World War II, I don't know that calling the new game Call of Duty World War II is a very smart idea. To me, it sounds a little bit too close to Battlefield 1. And because of that, it doesn't sound very original. So the other possibility for a setting is Vietnam. Now, the reason why a lot of people think that this is a real possibility is because Sledgehammer, who's the developer of this year's game, were actually working on a Vietnam-themed Call of Duty game. I think it was back in 2011. Now, the difference between this game and a typical Call of Duty game is that Sledgehammer's game was going to be set in the third person, and it was going to be an action-adventure game very much in the style of Uncharted. Now, you're probably thinking, why on earth was this set in the third person? Well, a lot of the Sledgehammer developers, including Michael Condrey, had actually worked on Dead Space prior to this, or just prior to this, so they were very familiar with gameplay and storytelling from the third person. Now, the internal name for this project at the time was Fog of War, so you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube which are called Call of Duty Fog of War. That's just an internal project name. I highly doubt that this year's game is going to be called Fog of War, and it's highly unlikely that it's going to be called Call of Duty Vietnam as well. The reason for that is that Condrey said in an interview a few years back that when they did research on the Vietnam War, that in most parts of the world it's actually not referred to as the Vietnam War, that's typically a North American label for it, and in fact in many other countries it's actually referred to as America's War. And again, I don't think that that's going to be the title either, because Call of Duty America's War just, I don't know, it just doesn't have a good ring to it. But obviously I could be completely wrong. Now, this third-person Call of Duty game set in Vietnam was actually cancelled, or supposedly cancelled, back in 2014. Based on a couple of interviews with Condrey, we do have some information about this cancelled game and how far along they got with it. So apparently there was about 6 to 8 months worth of development time put into it, and there was even apparently a 15-minute playable demo. I don't think this demo made it outside of the studio or internal testing, but at least they got it to a playable stage. We know that the game was set in Vietnam, but the major setting was actually Cambodia and also Laos. And also the reasoning behind the game being set in the third person, aside from the fact that a lot of the development team were really comfortable using the third person, is that they wanted to make the game scary. They wanted to emphasize how scary war is, and I'm sure, as someone who's never been to war, that it's terrifying. So I think that they wanted to use the third person to take a different approach and make the game unique in that respect. According to Glenn Schofield, who's one of the Sledgehammer co-founders, they'd actually built some underground tunnels and they were starting to get some Dead Space moments. And he also said that if they ever asked us to make a third-person Call of Duty game, I'd go back to what we were doing. So it certainly sounds like they were heavily invested in it and that they were looking forward to making this game. Now, maybe the success of Advanced Warfare has given them enough leverage to convince Activision to let them return to this concept. Although I highly doubt that this year's game will be in the third person. I severely doubt that Activision would allow them to do anything but first person. And personally, I don't really know if I would like to play a third-person Call of Duty game. We've had third-person modes in previous games before, and they were a nice novelty for sure. You might have played them for an hour or so or goofed around with friends, but I don't think anyone seriously into Call of Duty played the whole experience or played exclusively in online in third person mode. Now, what all this previous work means is that they've already done a huge amount of R&D, so they may have been able to actually salvage some elements and mechanics and gameplay or assets or even story elements for this year's game. Now, the one thing that I haven't covered is why did they cancel this third-person game? You know, if they were building something that sounded cool and new and innovative, why did Activision cancel it? Well, it wasn't actually Activision that cancelled it. It was kind of a combination of Sledgehammer and Activision deciding together to put the project on hold and then eventually cancel it. What happened was, during the fallout of Infinity Ward, when a lot of the staff members went to create Respawn and left, this was sort of during the end of Modern Warfare 2 and the beginning of Modern Warfare 3. So the development of Modern Warfare 3 suddenly lost all this staff, and Activision went to Sledgehammer and said, look, I know you guys are building a Call of Duty game, however, we really need some help with Modern Warfare 3. Would you like to come on board and help us finish that? The trade-off obviously was that Sledgehammer had to put their Call of Duty project on hold and go work on Modern Warfare 3. Now, they weren't dictated to. Apparently this was a decision that Activision let them make, and ultimately it was Sledgehammer's decision to put their current project on hold and work on Modern Warfare 3. Now, not being a game developer, I have no idea how easy it would be to transfer something like all the development time and storytelling and mechanics from the third person to the first person. As I mentioned previously, there were apparently some gameplay mechanics and some storytelling methods that were done in a way that wasn't possible in the first person. I have no idea what that means, but I'd certainly like to see a new take on Call of Duty. We've had pretty much the same style of Call of Duty game for the last 10 years. The tone has become more light-hearted, but the method of storytelling has always been kind of like a big action movie, like a big Michael Bay explosions and gunfire everywhere type of experience. The earlier games were more story-driven and were a lot more somber and dark in tone, but I would like to see a completely different interpretation of a Call of Duty game, and hopefully Sledgehammer have been given the opportunity to do this year. So anyway, what do you think? Do you think it's likely that this year's game is going to be set in the Vietnam War era, or do you think that it's more likely that it's going to be set in the World War II era? My personal preference would be for the Vietnam or Cold War era, but what I'm really hoping for this year is that the return to roots philosophy is extended to the gameplay mechanics and the game design itself. I don't think that supply drops and microtransactions are going anywhere, I've mentioned this before, but I'd really like to see them take the community feedback on board and stop putting weapons in supply drops. Put the weapons back in a regular progression system, make weapons attainable by everybody. If you have to grind for them, that's fine. Don't make the grind time 100 hours per epic weapon or whatever you want to call the weapon variants. Maybe scale back the variants as well. You don't want to have someone who's new to the game have to grind for 200 hours before they can unlock a weapon that makes them competitive. There should be competitive weapons right from the get-go. Anyway, I don't have a huge amount of hope that this is going to happen, but anyway, fingers crossed. Sledgehammer, please give us a good Call of Duty game this year. But anyway, that's all I've got for you in this video. I'm sorry if I rambled quite a bit. I'm still not 100%, and I'm sure that I didn't make a great deal of sense in many parts of this video. So feel free to let me know if that was the case. But otherwise, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm out.